The threat was the result of what I believe to be an appropriate disciplinary action related to the debate team. Again, the shooter was not removed from the debate team, and the teacher that was responsible for that disciplinary action was the shooter's main target. We still have to visit with a variety of people to determine what the outcome or interaction relative to the threat was.
Sheriff, are you prepared to release the suspect's DOB?
We will release the date of birth within the next day or so. I will tell you that he's 18 years old. He was 18 years old. But I will also tell you, and this is a bit of an editorial comment on my part, this is my personal perspective, followed by my professional responsibility. I will share his date of birth, but I will tell you that I am no longer inclined, nor will I speak his name in public. He is someone who victimized an innocent young lady by an act of evil, and in my opinion, deserves no notoriety and certainly no celebrity. He deserves no recognition. The issue here is the victimization of Claire Davis and the victimization of this community and this school. So it is my professional and my personal perspective that although I realize your responsibilities, I also understand my perspective on life, and I choose never to use his name again in public.
That was Arapahoe County, Colorado Sheriff Grayson Robinson, briefing the media the morning after the Arapahoe High School shooting, which took place in Colorado last week, on the eve of the anniversary of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. The focus in Arapahoe, since the shooting there last week, the focus has deliberately been on the victim of that shooting who was grievously wounded. The sheriff's commitment, as you just heard there, to not deliver notoriety or recognition to the gunman who perpetrated the crime and then killed himself. The sheriff's refusal to speak the gunman's name, that turns out to be catching on. In the New York Times today, some survivors of mass shootings and victims' family members are advancing the argument that gunmen in these incidents should, as much as possible, just be written out of the coverage of these crimes. David Cullen, who's been a guest on this show before, he's done some of the definitive long-term reporting on what happened at Columbine. He says that from his research, he feels like disappearing the perpetrators from the news coverage, it may be helpful. It may take away the whole point of the crime for a disturbed perpetrator who's looking for recognition, who's essentially committing the crime as a public performance, so he will be seen. So maybe never mentioning the perpetrator or anything about them or showing their picture could be deterrence. Maybe changing the way we cover shootings and we respond to them is a good idea. It's a small idea, but maybe it's an important one. And it's one that's a little bit outside the box. And little outside-the-box ideas like that may be important ideas. They are being advanced around the country now, especially in this past year since Newtown. And they're being led, in many cases, by mass shooting survivors and their families, and by victims' families. At Sandy Hook Elementary School last December, the two classrooms where the 20 kids were killed were first-grade classrooms. When the shooting started, a second-grade teacher at the school thought that the pop, pop, pop she was hearing were maybe some folding chairs stacked in the hall falling over. She looked out in the hallway, saw that that wasn't what it was. She saw the janitor sprinting toward the front of the building, and then she realized that what she was hearing was gunfire. Now, in addition to the janitor, there were also two kids in the hallway because they were walking the attendants down to the main office. I used to try to get that job when I was in elementary school, too. When she saw those kids in the hallway and realized they were in danger, she pulled them into her classroom to hide them and save them. Locked the door, read them stories and sang Christmas carols to muffle the sounds and to try to keep everybody calm. That teacher is named Abby Clemens. Her daughter, Sarah, is now part of Newtown Action Alliance. Her outside-the-box thinking has led her to try to start a whole new wing of the gun reform, anti-gun violence movement. It's the Junior NAA, the Junior Newtown Action Alliance, the first major gun violence prevention group in the U.S. to start its own student branch. The mother of one of those two kids who Sarah's mom pulled into that classroom at Sandy Hook is the group's adult advisor. Think about what this might mean. How would the reform movement change? How much power and talent and infrastructure would it build for the long run if there were student chapters of that organization and others like it in high schools across the country. If kids everywhere, if kids in high school, kids in college could join it, just like you join 4-H or Boy Scouts or the Junior NRA. Joining us now is Sarah Clemens. She's a senior at Newtown High School. She's the founder of the Junior Newtown Action Alliance. Sarah, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why did you want to form a junior version, a student version of the group?
So right after we founded Newtown Action Alliance, about 2 months after what happened in our town, I was the youngest member of Newtown Action Alliance, and I saw over a few weeks that my peers and my neighbors, especially in the high school and in the middle school, also wanted to do something. Right after it happened, we got millions and millions of donations, whether monetary or whether, hundreds of thousands of teddy bears. But that didn't exempt people in Newtown. We also had to do something.
Yeah.
So I founded the junior branch, not knowing that, like you said, it was the first major gun violence prevention group with a student branch. It was just to give students a voice, because I found that the best thing for me right after the tragedy was just to tell my story. Right after, about 2 or 3 months after, we had Newtown Action Alliance hosted sort of a panel discussion to discuss sort of what's next in terms of gun violence prevention. And one of the panelists is now my good friend Colin Goddard, who survived Virginia Tech. And afterwards, he told me something that I will never forget, and that really changed the course of the rest of this year for me, which is that don't let anybody tell you that your story doesn't matter. Because your story is what makes you unique. And it might sound cliche in a way, but it's really not to us, because anybody can look up these facts, anybody can read statistics and reports, but what makes this a real issue is students' voices and adults' voices and moms and dads and faith leaders who have had to go to hundreds and hundreds of funerals for their, congregation members in just the span of a year because of gun violence. Those are the voices that we have been projecting for the last year, and those are the voices that are really going to change this movement.
One of the things that I have heard people, especially from the community of Newtown, say in a way that sort of feels more grounded and solid than when I've heard other people say it, is that the kind of change that we need as a country to lessen gun violence, especially to lessen the kind of gun violence that results in these crazy mass shootings, is the kind of change that will take longer than any of our lives, than any of our activist careers, than any individual legislator's time in office, and that we need to be thinking long run about big term change. You are much younger than me, and younger than the other people who I've heard articulate that. Do you feel that way too, or do you feel a sense of urgency that's maybe different than adults who are sort of settling in for the long haul?
I think it's both. I absolutely am in this for the long run. I feel like, it's not this tragedy doesn't define who I am, but it's part of my story now. And part of the last year for me has been moving forward and trying to honor those that we lost with action. But I think there also is a sense of urgency, especially in the youth community. One of the big initiatives that Junior Newtown Action Alliance has been working on, especially in the coming months that we're really excited about, is bringing together urban students and suburban students. Sometimes I kick myself, when I'm doing this work, because I realize that all of these incidents happened, whether it was in the town next to me that experiences urban gun violence, or whether it was the Aurora shooting that happened 5 months before. I remember those things happening. I remember hearing about them, but I didn't do anything. And I think, now that my eyes have been opened, and now that we're trying to open other students' eyes, we're starting to see that if we can bring together young people with different backgrounds, and like I said, like what I was talking about with our stories, with different stories, we still want the same things to come from our tragedies. We experience different types of gun violence, but that doesn't mean that we don't want common sense legislation passed in honor of those that we lost. It doesn't mean that we don't want to continue to share our stories and teach compassion and understanding in nonviolent ways in high schools, and maybe even implement, after school programs that teach those things. That's one project that we're working on. So I think, like going back to your question, there's an urgency. All around the country we teach workshops to students, mostly high school students, just sort of the gun violence prevention 101 and how students can go back to their schools and communities and work on it. And no matter if we're in the South, if we're in Florida, we've taught it there. We've taught it in Hartford, where those students' stories are much, much different from the student stories in Florida. It doesn't matter. They always say the same things, that one, they're tired of seeing their friends lost to gun violence. They're tired of hearing those stories and carrying that burden on their shoulders. Two, they want to hear different things coming out of both sides, really, of the argument. They're tired of the redundant rhetoric.
Sure.
And then three, they want their voices to be heard. They want to be at the forefront of this debate, because really my generation is the most disproportionately affected by gun violence. The average age of a gun violence victim in the U.S. is 31 years old, which is sort of the tip of the millennial generation. So that means more than half of gun violence victims in the U.S. are young people. So I think you'll start to see, especially in 2014, sort of this bridge connecting students all around the country, so that we can come together for this one goal, which is, our opponents always talk about our agenda, and really our agenda is just to make our community safer, so we don't have to fear crossing gang lines to go to school, or just attending school in a place called Newtown, Connecticut.
Sarah Clemens, founder of the Junior Newtown Action Alliance. You make me feel both expectant and kind of hopeful for the prospects of this movement that you are both part of and building. You're a very impressive person. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. That probably helps to be the daughter of a superhero.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.